Hello, educators. So I have known what I wanted to do since second grade. I wanted to be a public school teacher. It was a bumpy path for me, but including dropping out of college at 19 and falling in love and all those things, but I finally made it. I was a special education teacher. I've lived my dream job. So it should come as no surprise to anybody in this room that I see the central problem in America today as inequality of opportunity. And I see the central challenge as how we create opportunity, not just for children born into privilege, but how we create opportunity for every single one of our children. And I have a plan for that. So here's how it starts. I think it's time for a wealth tax in America. This is a 2-cent tax on the top 0.1%. People with fortunes of $50 million or more. And then what do I want to do with that money? I want to invest it in the education and the future of every one of our children. It's about early childhood education. It's about post-high school education. But I want to make a quick pitch about it's also about an historic investment in K-12 in America. $800 billion that we could invest. That would mean quadrupling funding for Title I schools. It would mean for the first time fully funding IDEA so children with disabilities get the full education they need. It would mean $1 million excellence grant to every single public school in this country so that 25,000 public schools could become community schools. It means getting rid of high-stakes testing, and it means giving every educator an opportunity to be able to bargain on behalf of themselves and on behalf of their children. I think 2020 is all about our vision of how to build an America going forward, and for me, it's pretty clear. We build a great country when we invest in every one of our children. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to see you. Thank you. Hi.
Senator, great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Senator, great to see you again.
Nice to see you. Where do you want?
Right there.
Join us right
Perfect.
Got it.
Right off the beginning, you told us, shared with us, that you worked with students with special needs.
I did.
As president, what would you do to really help those students with special needs, considering this? We have a shortage, a declining number of people who are entering the field of education just for general ed, to say nothing about those teachers who are going in to help our children with special needs. And we have seen an explosion in the number of children who do come into schools representing special needs. As president, what can you do to help them beyond what we see in Title I programs and IDEA programs right now as far as the funding is concerned?
So let me start by saying, I think this work is not a job, it is a calling. I love this work. I had 4 to 6-year-olds in special education, and all these years later, I can still remember their faces. I can still remember things we worked on. What we have to do is open up enough pathways. First, that those children have the funding dedicated to those children so that there will be money available to hire the teachers, to hire the aides, to hire everyone they need. And that's what my 2-cent wealth tax is all about, making sure there's enough money there. And how do we make sure that we have enough teachers? Well, let's go to the part that's post-high school. What I can do with that same 2-cent wealth tax is that we can make all post-high school education, technical school, public apprenticeship programs, 2-year college and 4-year college, tuition free. That means anyone who wants to be a public school teacher or anything else will have the opportunity to get an education. I also would make an historic investment of $50 billion into our historically Black, colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions. Those places disproportionately provide our teachers for the next generation. And third, let's make it a little easier to be a public school teacher. That same 2 cents I will use to cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. We need to make teaching available, and we need to show it some real respect. And when I say respect, I don't mean a coffee mug that you buy someone at the holidays. I mean you pay them a salary, you pay them money so that they can afford to support their families and still be able to teach in public school.
Senator, you and I have been talking for over a decade about costs and economy, and we talked about how irresponsible structures around mortgages caused people who shouldn't get mortgages maybe to get them, and it contributed to a major collapse in our economy. College costs are growing at 8 times the rate that wages are growing at. Now, you are talking about solving certain problems by canceling college debts and by talking about tuition-free colleges and subsidies to help students pay for it. There is a part of me that worries that what Rahima and I should do is just go start a college, because you're telling me everybody will get paid for, and that's going to make that a great business for us. And that has happened, right? We have a lot of bad colleges in this country because it's a great business.
So, wait, there's no money going into the for-profit colleges. Sorry, this is about money that goes into public institutions. Public technical schools, public apprenticeship programs, public 2-year colleges, and public 4-year colleges.
Is there still a way to address, when there is an excess of money going into a system, how to make sure that's done efficiently? In other words, does college cost have to grow at the rate that it's been growing at when wages don't?
So one of the pieces that I put into this plan is to say, with this 2-cent wealth tax, we'll pick up the tuition part of this, but in return, the state has to continue to make the same investment. In other words, you don't pour money in at the top and then let them open up a hole so it drains out at the bottom. It then says you can't push costs off to students in other ways. So you're going to have to manage those costs internally because we want to keep the costs affordable for everyone, and we can use this federal lever to be able to do that. But as I said earlier, I want to make clear about this. This is not about funding for-profit colleges. There are way too many for-profit colleges that have been ripping students off for generations, leaving them stuck with debt. Those colleges should not have and will not have access to this money. This is about public universities that are open to everyone.
Senator, you've talked about cutting off funding for charter schools, am I right?
No, not current charter schools.
For cutting off funding for expanding charter schools.
Well, I'm not sure you call it cutting off, but yeah. What I believe is that public school money needs to stay in public schools.
Right now, the majority of children who find themselves in public charter schools are minority children, are black and brown children. Some parents of those black and brown children say, what do I do while I wait for my public school to get up to speed to provide my child with the kind of academic excellence that they deserve? What do you say to those parents who are looking for that public charter school option?
So I've met with many parents and grandparents who've put their children in public charter schools, and I have no doubt about the sincerity of their efforts to educate their children. And they're looking for the best educational opportunity they can find. I believe that. But I believe that it is our responsibility as a nation, and will be my responsibility as President of the United States, to make certain that every public school is an excellent public school.
Yes, that's future-oriented. We've been trying to do that for years. We've been spending billions of dollars in education reform in this country for decades, and we are not there yet in terms of the academic excellence. You know what the nation's report card just came out and said. in terms of our students being able to read in fourth and eighth grade?
I'm not proposing cutting funding for children who are currently in charter schools. I believe that for-profit charter schools should be closed, but that's a different issue. I also believe that all charter schools should have to meet exactly the same requirements that all other public schools have to meet. But I can't let you sit here and tell me that we've already put plenty of money into our schools.
Oh, I'm not saying we have. I'm not saying we have. I'm saying we have spent billions of dollars. That's a fact. And people are saying we don't have yet the results that we want.
Well,
people would like to see more money spent.
I understand $1 billion is a lot of money.
Well, it's more than $1 billion.
We have a lot of public schools. And so my proposal is, how about we put $800 billion into our public schools and make them all excellent schools. And notice in this is about equalizing opportunity. This is the big division in America today. I want to quadruple funding for Title I schools. That's how we create opportunity for our children, as well as fully fund IDEA. We've got to make sure that our children have equal opportunities. And so long as we keep basing funding mostly on whether or not you live in a neighborhood where they can afford to pay high property taxes or low property taxes, we're going to keep moving the opportunities for our children further and further apart. A child born into privilege has great opportunity in this country. I want every child to have great opportunity in this country.
So you have talked about...
I'll put money behind it.
You've talked about quadrupling Title I funding. You've also discussed changing the way in which that money is distributed and applied. Talk to us about that. What would you change about it? What do you think is not working about the quarter of the money that you propose that is already going into the system? How would you make it more effective?
We need more money in Title I schools. I mean, it's expensive to educate children who face so many challenges. You know, so many issues hit in our public schools. Homelessness hits right at the heart of our public schools. Food insecurity, a child who comes to school hungry, hits in our public schools. Children who are living in households that are having to move around, children that are living in households where they're not safe. These are all issues that bear down on our public schools. So the way we have to think about this is, as a nation, it's time to make a real investment. And we can do this by asking those at the very top just to pay a little more. A 2-cent wealth tax, 2 cents from the top 0.1%. Sorry, it goes up to 3 cents if you're a billionaire. The top 0.1%. And what can we do? We can do universal child care and universal early education for every baby in this country, age 0 to 5. We can do universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. We can raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in this country. We can make the investment of $800 billion in our public schools. We can make the investment in the colleges. We can raise the thresholds for Pell Grants so that people can actually get access to college. We can invest in our HBCUs. We can invest in canceling student loan debt. You can't do any of this without money. The question is not, how do we take what we're currently spending at the federal level and move it around? It's like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. You just keep creating shortages because it's basically funded at way too small a level. Until we're willing to put the commitment down on paper and say, we want to invest not a little bit, but we want to invest what it takes to create a quality of opportunity for every one of our children. That's when we will make real change.
Senator, I'm wondering, is there a priority? It's like a person who has a house, the roof is leaking, the windows are drafty, the door is falling apart. Is there a priority in terms of spending of all of the things that you just ticked off?
Yes, and that is asking the billionaires to put in 2 cents. No, you give me this face. Look.
And that 2 cents is for what exactly?
It's to make the investment across the board. That's the point. Let's have
all at the same time?
Money. Yes.
Okay.
Because there's enough money to do that. You know, maybe this is the shocking part, is that to ask the top 1/10 of 1% in this country, the greatest 75,000 fortunes, that's what we're talking about here, to ask them to pay just 2 cents on their accumulated wealth. Anybody in here own a home? You've been paying a wealth tax. It's just called a property tax. All I'm saying for these guys is your property tax ought to include not only your real estate, but your stock portfolio, the diamonds, the Rembrandt, and the yacht. Right now, this year, the 99% will pay about 7.2% of their total wealth in taxes. That top 1/10 of 1% will pay less than half that, 3.2%. Asking them to pitch in 2 pennies more or 3 pennies more so that every one of our children can have adequate funding to get a first-rate education from the time they're babies until they finish their post-high school education. I think that is more than fair, and I think that's how we build a real future in this country.
Let's go to the first microphone, please.
Good afternoon. You know, it may be raining outside, but it is beautiful inside this hall that we are finally putting public education front and center in this presidential election. Thank you all for being here. I am Becky Pringle. I am a middle school science teacher. Yay! That's right, I taught those babies with attitude. And I earned my degree right down the road a piece at the University of Pittsburgh. I have the privilege and the honor of serving as the vice president of the National Education Association, yes, who represents over 3 million educators here in the United States and around the world. We have had our members so engaged in this conversation. They have submitted thousands of questions, and I have the privilege of reading one of them to you, Senator Warren. This one comes from Karen. She's from Woodland, California, and this is what she wants to ask you. High-quality early education represents one of the best investments that this country can make. We know that studies show that children in quality preschool programs do well academically, and they are less likely to drop out of school. As president, what would you do to make universal access to preschool a reality, and how would you support those early childhood educators?
Well, I start with 2 cents. And that's because I agree with the person who's asking the question, Becky. I think this is exactly right. We need to be making this investment from the time our children are babies. Understand this, well-to-do people are doing it, right? If they've got money, this isn't just about there's no one home to take care of them. They bring their children to these early enrichment programs when they're little tiny. I want those enrichment programs. I want full daycare available to every one of our babies age 0 to 5, and we can pay for it with a 2-cent wealth tax. And I just want to say on this, and it also supports federally funded, universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America, and it raises the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. That's what my plan does. If I can, I just want to make a short pitch. I believe this would be life transformative for all of our babies, that all of our babies are getting these opportunities. You know, we started school at 6 years old way back, a century and a half ago, 2 centuries ago, and we thought children didn't learn anything. until they were 6 years old. Then we backed it up to kindergarten, and now we understand. They're learning, and they're learning early. Transformative for our babies and transformative for their mamas and for their daddies. Universal high-quality child care is about people being able to finish their education. A mama who can finish school, who can take a job, who can go from a part-time job to a full-time job, and know that her child is in a high-quality educational setting. And it would also be transformative for everyone who works in this area. Right now, we exploit many of the people who do child care and early childhood education. We need to raise the wages of everyone who works in this area to the professional levels they deserve. We want to transform this country. Let's start with our babies' mamas, and our babies' teachers.
Senator, thank you for the answer. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
We have another question over here.
Senator Warren, I'm Isaac Piquel, here representing GEOC, the Graduate Student Union at Wayne State University in Detroit.
Hubba, hubba.
As grad students strike for fair contracts, livable wages, and sexual harassment protections at Harvard and UC Santa Cruz, and thank you, Senator, for your solidarity, it is important to remember that nearly 75% of college and university educators work without the promise or the protection of tenure, making grad students, adjuncts, and part-time faculty the best educated members of the gig economy. Despite ever-increasing tuition and college costs, the median pay for non-tenured teachers is less than $3,000 per class, and according to a recent AFT study, 25% of adjuncts are food insecure. What would your higher education plan do to make life and work more sustainable for contingent faculty and help us reach the careers we have worked so hard for and hire more black teachers?
Thank you, Isaac. So thank you for the question, but also thank you for the work you do every day. And thanks for helping organize a union, because, boy, that is where I start. When workers have a strong union, then workers will have power in the workplace. And all of my education plan emphasizes that educators are entitled to bargain collectively. Collective bargaining is at the heart. But a second part, let's see if we can intersect a couple of the ways that we can affect graduate student life. Part of it is when we put federal money in to cover those tuition dollars, that gets more money into our universities. Helps a little bit. Because part of the problem, notwithstanding, as you've talked about costs going up, is who's been paying those costs. It used to be the case a few decades back at public universities, $3 out of $4 of the cost of educating a student was picked up by the state. Today, in most places, about $1 out of $4, and that means it's pushed off onto families, or it means students have to borrow and borrow and borrow. So partly it's to get some more resources in and to get some accountability behind those resources. A third part that I think may be helpful to some graduate students is student loan debt forgiveness. We cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. That should ease up on the budget for a lot of our graduate students. You're telling me that's going to work for you. Is that right, Isaac? All of those will help. But at its heart is really what you're doing, and that is taking the public platform, which I will also take, and lift up the message that our colleges and universities, our community colleges, are about graduate student labor, and that we need to treat our graduate students like the professionals they are as they contribute to the education of our young people. So thank you, Isaac. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Question from that mic.
Good morning. My name is Rodney Robinson. I teach middle and high school social studies at Virgil Benford Education Center, a school inside the Richmond Juvenile Jail and I am the 2019 National Teacher of the Year. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We have a major problem in education with cultural equity. 50% of our students are students of color, while 80% of our teachers are white. And recent reports show the most effective way to increase the graduation rate is to have a teacher of color in front of students of color. Besides investing in HBCUs, what programs would you put in place to guarantee that students have teachers and administrators who look like them and value their cultures? Thank you.
Good. So let's just start with the notion of when we invest in public universities, what that means. I've talked about we want to bring down tuition so that every public university is tuition free. And I want to increase Pell Grants, both in terms of the number of dollars and in terms of the eligibility, so that students are able to see a path for themselves to go to college. I know you said besides, but I have to include it. The importance of investing in HBCUs cannot be overstated.
I agree.
You know, I just want to remind everybody in here, again, in terms of equity and fairness, a century ago, we built great public universities with tax dollars and then turned around in many places and said to students of color, but you're not welcome here, whether it was official or unofficial. The HBCUs grew up largely out of charity from the black churches, and they have always been struggling for funds. As one HBCU president said to me, we do the most with the least. It is time to treat these HBCUs that turn out a disproportionate number of teachers of color, time to treat them fairly and put a $50 billion investment into them so we can level the playing field. And to say for HBCUs, whether an HBCU is public or private, we'll cover the tuition. So just like with the public state universities, HBCUs will all be tuition free and have access to more Pell money. But if I can, there's one more piece I want to talk about, and that is the student loan piece, because I think all of this is critical for producing more diversity among our teachers, and that is on student loan debt. We know now in America that African American students have to borrow more money to go to college. They borrow more money while they're in college, and they have a harder time paying it off after they graduate. I saw recent data that suggests that 20 years out, people who've borrowed money to go to college, 94% of whites have paid off that money, 5% of African Americans have. So it becomes a lifetime struggle. We support our teachers, we support our students of color when we make college accessible to them without forcing them to go into debt, and when we say 2021 is it. We're going to cancel student loan debt and let America go forward and build a future. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rodney, and congratulations, Teacher of the Year.
And thank you, Senator Elizabeth
Thank you,
Warren.
Senator Warren.
Thank you so much, Senator. Good to see you again.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Senator.